first eye immediately pointed the finger at Anandamaga, and the media were quick to pick up the cues. For example, on February the 14th, the Australian newspaper ran an article under the title, "Baba, the clerk who sparked a crusade." Although it was run under the logo of the Hilton bombing, it had nothing to do with it, and instead concentrated on painting the Anandamaga as a sect of revolutionary killers prepared to go to any lengths in an attempt to get their imprisoned leader released. Anandamaga spokespersons, including Tim Anderson, who was Public Relations Secretary at the time, consistently denied any involvement in the bombing and restated their belief in non-violent protest to achieve their aims.
Anandamaga has never advocated violence or bombing or terrorism. Anandamaga has always advocated its philosophy of being self-realisation and service to humanity. It advocates teaching meditation for individual well-being and happiness, and involved in social work, relief, welfare, education, social justice, the arts, things like this, things which will help society, not destroy it.
For a terrorist attack, the Hilton bombing was unusual in that no cause was advertised and no demands were made. As no one stepped forward to claim responsibility for the outrage, a logical question to ask is, who stood to gain? Anandamaga was not the only organisation to receive a bad press in the months just prior to the Hilton bombing. The security forces had also come under fire. First, there was the Hope Report, in which the judge roundly criticised the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation for inefficiency, breaches of security, misdirected investigations and general lack of intelligence. This was followed by the extraordinary revelations of the White Report into the South Australian Special Branch, the state police arm of ASIO. This resulted in the sacking of Police Commissioner Harold Salisbury for concealing information from the government. Further investigations were announced into the security forces in New South Wales and South Australia in the week just before the Hilton bombing, and it was pointed out that members of the security forces could be compelled to attend and compelled to answer questions.
And the political climate was clearly going in the wrong direction, and one would have to see that it was a very timely explosion indeed, as far as security was concerned.
The Hilton bombing provided a very good excuse to abort all those inquiries and investigations that were being held and which...
The inquiries were called off, and within 3 weeks, the new ASIO bill, giving vastly extended powers to Australia's internal security force, was tabled in Parliament.
It's probably one of the most savage bills that have passed through the federal parliament in perhaps our legal history. ASIO can now come in and break into your house quite legally. It can tap your phone, it can plant bugs, it can take material away from your office or your home, and if you try and prevent them, then there are very savage penalties inflicted on people.
Who stood to gain? Quite obviously, the security forces themselves. According to Richard Seary, he first became involved in the case about a week after the bombing. He said he had just seen Star Wars when he approached police stationed at the Hilton with information about the Hare Krishna. Seary had given police information about the group several years before. Now he agreed to infiltrate the Anandamaga for the New South Wales Special Branch to find evidence linking them with the Hilton bombing. For the next 4 months, Seary participated in the general activities of the group, reporting back regularly to his personal contact in Special Branch, Detective Senior Constable Korzik. When Seary did approach police with important information, it had nothing whatsoever to do with the Hilton bombing. He told Korzik that Tim, Paul and Ross intended to blow up Robert Cameron, the leader of the National Front. But it was not till more than a month later that he also told police that Paul and Ross had admitted to him to doing the Hilton bombing. This allegation was to ensure the Cameron trial a space on the front page of every newspaper across the country. What sort of man was it on whom police were relying to become principal Crown witness? Siri was a drifter, going from job to job. He liked to think of himself as a writer of fiction, and he said he could have written Star Wars better. The self-conscious journal he kept during his period with Ananda Marga was to become important evidence. He had a long history of mental instability and had been under psychiatric care on numerous occasions. His records also showed a history of drug abuse.
He's given all sorts of accounts of drug usage, some of them that he used drugs very heavily over quite a long period, things like a hit of LSD every weekend for 4 years, cocaine at the age of 16, shooting up on heroin 4 times a day. Now, if he was taking drugs in that amount, obviously that would have a devastating effect on his mind, his memory, everything. He may not have been taking them. It may be that that's just a story he's spinning. But if that's the case, it shows that he really is an extraordinarily compulsive fantasizer and wants to tell amazing stories about himself.
Most of the things that Siri said were outright lies, and I have personal experience of this because the night that we went postering, we were stopped by the police. And later, years later actually, I read his account in his journal of that event, and he'd made up entire conversations between me and the police.
Siri lied about himself on numerous occasions. For example, he said he'd had a lung removed when x-rays show that he did not. These x-rays and other evidence proving that Siri had lied about himself were not admissible in court under the rules of evidence, so defence lawyers were prevented from proving to the jury that Siri was an unreliable witness. Only one of the 12 jurors in the first trial disbelieved him.
Funnily enough, when he was giving his evidence in the beginning, I found him quite believable. And at that time, I was thinking, gee, you know, the people on trial haven't got a hope. The way the evidence was going, and you know, I was looking at the bloke, and I was looking at everybody to see, you know, what I thought of them. But later on, you know, under cross-examination, he didn't come out of it very well at all, and some of the things he said were just incredible. You just couldn't believe him.
Siri must rank as one of the least credible, least plausible witnesses ever to step into a witness box in this country. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why so many people have had reservations and worries and doubts about the legitimacy of the convictions.
Another newspaper article appeared, which once again linked Ananda Marga with the Hilton bombing. The security chiefs, now known to have been from ASIO, had leaked a completely unsubstantiated story to the press, and the journalist had accepted it without question. This story appeared only 4 days before Siri went to the police with his story of another bombing conspiracy.
Step up, young men, you stand accused by an informer's trumped-up story. He's lied to you, he's lied to the cops, and now he'll lie to the jury. He's changed his tale so many times, and each time it's more damning. He's peddling lies to those who'll buy his treachery and shamming.
Even before they'd heard any evidence at all, jurors were led to believe that the accused were extremely dangerous men. Police sharpshooters were stationed on the roof of the court, and people entering the courtroom were searched with metal detectors. One policeman was even openly carrying his gun inside the courtroom. However, all this elaborate security was maintained only for the first couple of days of each trial and then dropped. By that time, however, the damage had been done.
You know, we weren't allowed to go anywhere around the court or out of our homes without being picked up by a car. So there was pretty tight security, and there was tension there all the time.
It sort of puts you on your guard a little bit. You just wonder what we got ourselves into.
And it only went on for a few days, which seemed to be a whole big act to prejudice the jury and the community outside that they were in actual fact terrorists. And
this atmosphere, I feel, would make it virtually impossible for any juror to be objective in considering the evidence.
So what did happen on the night of June the 15th? Certain facts are not disputed by either the prosecution or the defence. They agreed that Siri arrived in a car at Quillian Avenue, Newtown at about 10:50 p.m. and parked, watched by police in several vehicles. After a few minutes, Tim and Paul walked down Little Queen Street, crossed Quillian Avenue and got into the car. Ross arrived a little later and also got in. Siri then drove up Quillian Avenue to City Road, where Tim got out. With Paul and Ross, Siri continued along the highway to Yagoona, where police stopped the car and arrested the occupants. A blue denim bag containing the components of a bomb was found on the back seat of the car. Meanwhile, back at Queen Street, Newtown, the Inanamaga Centre, Tim was arrested. All three were taken to the CIB and questioned. These are the agreed facts. But where the prosecution and the defence differed was in their interpretation of these facts. Sydney lawyer and journalist Tom Malombi was present in court and had the opportunity of assessing the evidence.
Really, the most noticeable single feature about the evidence in the case is the very large number of things that just don't make sense unless you assume that they were made up afterwards and put into the story. And a very good example of that is the very important episode at Quillian Avenue.
Ross says that he came to Quillian Avenue that night through the grounds of Sydney University. The police say something quite different. They claim that he came from the same direction as the other two, down Little Queen Street, presumably from the Inanamaga Centre further up the block. They also claim that he was carrying under his arm the blue denim bag containing the bomb. This evidence of how the bomb got to the car is crucial to the prosecution case. However, there are some serious problems with police descriptions of this event.
The fact that some of the police went to great detail to say that they could, from 150 feet and even 200 and 300 feet, they could see the lining on the bag. They could see the stitching at night.
Also, two of the observing police separately swore on oath that Ross was wearing white sand shoes, but press photos taken out at Yagoona that night show that he was, in fact, wearing dark leather shoes.
So two policemen, coincidentally, made a very strange mistake. They both made a mistake about the same thing, and they both made the same mistake. Now, that is only consistent with them having got their heads together about what their story would be, and if they got their heads together about that, one can well ask, what else did they get their story together about?
The police story is unconvincing in another aspect. They claim that Ross was the only one of the three to bring anything to the car and that he brought the bag. So if the bomb was going to be anywhere, it had to be in that bag. Yet police did not behave as if they believed it was there. Siri's contact, Krawczyk, was involved in the police operation at Quillian Avenue and claimed to have seen Ross bring the bag to the car. Yet he gave no warning to police who were to intercept the car that the bomb may have been in the bag. After making the arrests at Yagoona, police did not search the car immediately for a bomb. When they did find it, it was a great surprise and they immediately scattered in all directions. It seems amazing that Krawczyk could have failed to pass on such vital information. This behaviour is simply not consistent with his claim that he saw Ross carry the bag to the car.
It is consistent, though, with having discovered that the explosives were in the blue bag and having decided that they'd have to have a story for how the blue bag got into the car. Because if Ross Dunn's story is true, they didn't see the blue bag carried in and they didn't even see Ross Dunn get into the car because he came from the side where they weren't watching.
When police found three men in a car with a bomb, they had no proof as yet of who had brought the bomb to the car. And of course, such proof was necessary in order to get a conviction. That proof was provided by police evidence that it was Ross who carried the bomb to the car. Defence counsel cross-examined Siri at length on this question of how the bomb got to the car.
He was accused, and this was one of the high points of the trial. It was probably the most emotional part of the trial as far as Siri was concerned. He was outright accused of going home and getting the bomb in this car that he stole. And his denial was, I didn't go into my place at all. which if you look at it, it can mean that he went home but he didn't go in. And he went on in great detail to explain that he couldn't have hidden the bomb inside his house because it was the landlady's day to clean. And when you look at it again, well, that only indicates that if the bomb was hidden at his place, it wasn't inside, it was nearby. And that explains, you know, in some way why he might have said, I didn't go into my place at all.
Paul and Ross were also charged with attempting to murder the arresting police. This charge was based on evidence given by Detective Sergeant Gilligan that Ross was trying to detonate the bomb when the car was intercepted.
And it's that evidence about Ross having the bag on his knees with his hands in it, and Siri's story about their plan to set it off, which is really the key evidence in the charge of having attempted to murder the policeman who pulled the car over.
Now, Ross says that when the car was pulled over, he jumped out and was grabbed and handcuffed by Gilligan. But Gilligan says something else.
Well, this policeman said that I opened the door of the car and I saw Dunn with his hands in the bag, intimating that he was trying to set the bomb off. I grabbed him round the throat and I pulled him bodily from the car. And he went, you know, into great detail to say that, you know, that he did this with a great deal of force. And if you can imagine someone sitting with a soft type denim bag on their lap and they've got their hands in it and someone grabs them round the throat and pulls them outwards out of a car, well, where would you think the bag would go?
Now, that bag could have only gone in two places. It could have perhaps slipped off my lap onto the floor or the footwell area, or it could have come out of the car with me.
Now, that isn't consistent with the evidence of the policeman who found the blue bag in the back seat, because he says it was neatly upright in the middle of the seat, which it just couldn't have been if it had been on Ross's knees and he'd been dragged out in that way.
I mean, when you're on a jury and you're weighing up the evidence of one policeman against another, let alone two, I mean, you must say, even if it was one against one, you'd have to give the person on trial the benefit of the doubt, wouldn't you?
The second jury didn't. Jurors were faced with having to accept either the prosecution or the defence case in the absence of independent witnesses to most of the events of the night of June the 15th. But when there were independent witnesses, namely the Army Bomb Disposal Squad, which had been called out to Yagoona, their evidence supported that of Ross against the police. They testified that Ross had a conversation with them that supported his innocence, but police swore on oath that that conversation never happened. While all this was going on out at Yagoona, police raided the Ananamaga Centre at Newtown.
Well, the whole household was asleep because it was 1 a.m. and I was woken by the sound of glass smashing and shouting. When I came out of my room, there were 4 detectives running up the stairs really fast, and they went straight for the room where Tim was sleeping.
Crawsick had returned from Yagoona for the raid and was accompanied by other police, including Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson from the Armed Hold-Up Squad. Rogerson is known to have killed 3 times, one of his victims being drug dealer Warren Lanfranchi.
When police came to arrest me, the only evidence they had to charge me with was serious oral evidence at that stage, and they needed something more than that to arrest me. And so when Crawsick, the Special Branch Detective, came in, when he came into number 9 Queen Street, the first thing that he put his hand on in that house was these notes.
These notes were copies of press releases to the Sydney Morning Herald and Australian newspapers and signed by the One World Revolutionary Army.
All racist elements should take warning from the attack on Nazi racist leader Cameron tonight. This is not an isolated attack, but a systematic campaign to smash the artificial boundaries that divide one
in the
human
room
being.
gave evidence, a senior policeman gave evidence at the time, watch out for fingerprints, which seems reasonable. But lo and behold, what did they do? They just kept reading them, they passed them around to one another, they gave this in evidence that they did this, and really it was just incredible. It was just a joke. If you saw that on a TV show, you just wouldn't believe it, you'd turn it off.
In retrospect, this seemed really important because Richard Seary, we believe, was the author of the notes, and if anybody's fingerprints were to be found on the notes, they would have been his.
When we asked whose fingerprints were found on the letter, hoping that maybe the police hadn't covered them all up, there was none of Anderson's there to be found.
An odd fact emerged in court in Crawsick's evidence about these notes.
Recorded in his notebook some 4 hours before I was arrested. This has been clearly established in court. Recorded in his notebook were the details of those notes, which he could not possibly have known unless he had those notes or had seen those notes.
The only way he could have got this evidence was from his plant, who was Seary, and Seary gave evidence denying that he ever gave that information to the policeman.
Could it have been that he himself had written the notes? After all, he'd had access to the Anamaga typewriter and had already given police samples of the typing. An interesting thing about the raid at Queen Street, Newtown, is that the police did not even bother to search the place for incriminating evidence of the bomb which they themselves said had been brought from there by Ross. Why not?
They only decided afterwards that the story would be that the bomb had come from that direction.
It is only when seen in this light that the police account of what they actually did on the night makes sense. But there are other things worth noting too.
The striking feature of the case is the lack of material evidence. There are no fingerprints found on the bomb, even though Seary said that Dunn was fiddling with the bomb on the car journey, and the police claimed that Dunn was attempting to detonate the bomb when they arrested him. Neither are there fingerprints found on the notes produced at Newtown.
And all the evidence is circumstantial. There's no real hard evidence.
The army evidence, the forensic evidence, Seary's notebooks, all these things support our evidence.
We've only been accused of being involved by a person who I think is an obvious liar.
If you turned all the evidence around and aimed it at Seary, the same evidence, and aimed it at Seary and put Seary on trial, it fits him like a glove. You'd find him guilty in 10 minutes, I'd reckon.
In addition to Seary's testimony and the circumstantial evidence, police also relied on confessions, which they said the three Margies had made.
The police verbal evidence against Tim, which consisted of a speech about how they would overcome the evil forces of the world, was just so ludicrous to anybody who knew him or ever had a conversation with him, that it was... His friends just laughed when they read it in the paper that these were words that he was supposed to have spoken.
I've been informed that it was your intention to kill the man Cameron by means of that explosive. Do you have anything to say about that?
He's a Nazi racist, and he and his type will infect others. You think you've done well by preventing us from doing this, but you haven't.
He's a racist pig and doesn't deserve to live in the world. We are humanitarians doing a service to humanity. We will never be stopped. And Anamaga will cleanse the earth.
It will not stop here. What was going to happen tonight was the only justice that Cameron and his kind deserve. You will suffer the consequences.
When verbal evidence is manufactured against you, you have to try and prove your innocence. Now, this is virtually impossible, and all you can do is try and discredit the evidence that's brought against you.
The jury just can't believe that many police will lie, you know. I mean, who are they going to believe? Three members of an Anamaga, an accused organisation, an organisation that's had a hell of a lot of bad publicity, or are they going to believe 9 members of the police force, reputedly of good character, integrity, and upholding justice?
Certain things should be taken into account in assessing this police verbal evidence.
Firstly, an Anamaga has a policy of not speaking to police without the presence of a lawyer. That is following the advice of the Council of Civil Liberties. Secondly, Tim was the one who in fact wrote up the policy. Thirdly, Seary supported our evidence that when we were arrested, I told him and Ross not to say anything until we had a lawyer.
According to the police story, they suddenly decided in an aberrant moment to spill the beans. And they made these extraordinarily incriminating statements.
I feel that it is dangerous for a jury to rely on police evidence of confessions in the absence of a signed record of interview, because I feel if an accused person makes a confession, you would think he would be happy to sign a record of interview.
It seems incredible that the three of them would all break down and make these confessions. But the police said it happened. I don't believe it.
And when I heard them getting up and spilling out all this stuff they'd invented, it was just amazing, you know. I can't remember whether I was angry, upset, or nervous about it. It was a strange situation, really, really unpleasant.
Step up, young men, you've been condemned. The cops have got you verbaled. Though you contest that you confess, the judge believes their gabble. Their evidence is full of holes, but truth is not accepted. Your word or theirs, they've got you snared, for cops are well respected.
Terrorism has arrived in Australia at last! And now to find a scapegoat for this terrible act!
We now know that the factor which most prejudiced the jury was Siri's allegation that Paul and Ross had told him that they were responsible for doing the Hilton bombing, along with Tim and another person.
This was, of course, the thing that dominated the case and dominated the press reports of the case, that this was meant to be the solution to the Hilton bombing, and this is, you know, the beginning point and the end point of this whole case.
In fact, I'm quite sure that most people in the community today believe that an Undermarga was responsible for the Hilton bombing, and in fact that we were responsible for the Hilton bombing, that is, me and Tim and Paul.
Siri waited quite a while before giving police this extraordinary information.
It is not until a month after the arrest at Yagoona that Siri gave evidence to the police of an alleged conversation in which Dunn and Alistair supposedly described how they planted the bomb at the Hilton Hotel. This is extraordinary, bearing in mind the fact that Siri had infiltrated the group specifically to seek evidence linking Ananda Marga with the Hilton bombing.
Even though the judge said, remember, they're not on trial for the Hilton, they still allowed all the evidence.
When they felt that these fellas may have been involved with this Hilton bombing, well, they just decided then and there that they should be put away.
Well, that was just a malicious lie. We never made any admissions whatsoever.
It is a total fabrication by Siri, and I believe he invented it or was goaded into inventing it by the police because he was under duress.
Personally, I wasn't even in the state when it happened. I was in Adelaide at the time. I have witnesses and material evidence to prove it, if we're ever charged with it.
While the judge allowed Siri's Hilton allegations in court, Paul's evidence was disallowed because it had nothing to do with the charges he was facing.
It was just one of those pathological cases taking place as it did in an environment of extraordinary emotionalism whipped up by the Hilton bombing allegations, where I think on balance the jury was led into a decision which subsequently they may have regretted.
Siri remains a mysterious character who makes the implausible seem plausible by a skillful blend of fact and fiction, and we can only speculate on what his motives might have been when he infiltrated Ananda Marga for Special Branch. Did he approach police in a sense of public-spirited duty, as he said, or was he after notoriety, enjoying the game of intrigue and deceit? Did the police have some hold over him? What other motive could Siri have had?
No rational person dispassionately applying his mind to the evidence for the prosecution could reasonably come to a verdict of guilty against any of the three.
But the courtroom was not the place for dispassionate thought. Not only were the jurors exposed to the Hilton allegations, but they also heard a long and highly prejudicial cross-examination of the three men about the general aims and beliefs of Ananda Marga.
At the last trial, I was only cross-examined on matters of evidence for about 5% of the time. The rest of the other 95% was mudslinging.
Is it surprising then that the second jury returned within a comparatively short time with a verdict of guilty?
The cold-blooded, murderous nature of your conduct on the night of the 15th of June speaks eloquently of the extent to which your real natures have been captured by the beliefs of the Ananda Marga. Men who resort to the bomb have no place whatsoever in our community, and little mercy can be shown to them.
When the foreman had made his decision and the judge had given his verdict, the police seemed to be elated, and they did a little bit of a clap with their hands, and then as we filed out from the court, they all said, good show, good decision. And we thought that was a bit unusual coming from the police, but which made me feel that that's what they wanted.
Tim, Paul and Ross were convicted of conspiring to murder Robert Cameron and given 16 years with no non-parole period. Paul and Ross were also found guilty of attempted murder and given a 16-year concurrent sentence. They were jailed in June 1978 and are still in jail today. No doubt, as a result of the remarks of the judge in sentencing, bravery awards were given to the arresting police. This occurred whilst an appeal was pending before the Court of Criminal Appeal.
This represents the worst misuse of the Governor-General's office since the Sir John Kerr dismissed the Whitlam government on the 11th of November 1975.
Although the Hilton bombing was portrayed as Australia's first major terrorist incident, the relevant authorities somehow didn't get around to holding an inquest till 4.5 years later. Tim, Paul and Ross hoped that this would provide them with the opportunity of clearing their names of Siri's Hilton allegations. Siri was recalled from the UK, where he'd been since the end of the second trial, to give the same evidence that had so prejudiced the jury at the Cameron trial. It is curious that the police had had this evidence for 4 years, but had never acted on it. It was on Siri's evidence alone that coroner Norman Walsh found a prima facie case of murder against Paul and Ross and terminated the inquest. He forwarded his findings to the New South Wales Attorney-General, who decides whether to commit them for trial or not. Once again, Paul was denied the opportunity of presenting evidence that showed he was in Adelaide at the time of the bombing. If Paul and Ross were not going out to Yagoona to murder Robert Cameron, what were they going out there for?
Going out there to check it out for the possibility of doing war writing anti-racist graffiti around the area.
And what about the bomb?
I was in the car when Siri picked us up. He didn't tell us about the bomb until we actually got out to Yagoona.
So how is it that three Margis came to be blamed for such serious crimes?
The Ananda Marga are essentially a politico-religious sect who have no links with either the left or the right in Australian politics. And as such, they formed a very convenient scapegoat.
I think they were framed because they had been activists. They had held a demonstration at the Hilton at the time of the Shogham conference. I think the police came under pressure to solve the Hilton crime, and they were chosen as the scapegoats. They suited the bill.
It seems that if Siri had not come along and infiltrated Ananda Marga, Tim, Paul and Ross would not be in jail today. And of course, Siri made his entrance shortly after the bomb went off at the Hilton. Who planted the bomb remains a mystery, but one thing is clear. Despite the deaths of 3 people, no Australian government, state or federal, seems to want to institute a full judicial inquiry into the bombing, nor to investigate allegations of the involvement of the security forces in it.
If the Australian government was fair dinkum about its nonsensical claim that this was the first terrorist incident in this country, then you'd think they'd be falling over themselves to hold a royal commission into the whole affair so that they could justify that claim.
My guess is that the bombing of the Hilton Hotel at the Chogham Conference in 1978 was carried out by ASIO, who planted a bomb which was meant to be found, but which exploded before it could be found.
If the security forces can get away with this disgusting act, then they will feel that they can get away with absolutely anything.
If Tim, Paul and Ross were to be retried for the Cameron conspiracy or put on trial for the Hilton bombing, would they, or indeed could they, ever get a fair trial?
Well, I'd have to have second thoughts. That's why I'm here, and I feel, I think there could have been a grave injustice done.
I was very much aware that these sort of things happened in other countries, but it was a great shock to know that they happened in the lucky country.
I believe in British justice and all that sort of thing, but after a little while in the court I knew that that wasn't so, and now I don't believe in it anymore.
The conviction of these 3 young men is quite obviously a warning by those in power to anybody holding unorthodox or radical views.
So really we've got 16 years from a legal point of view for just unsubstantiated allegations by the police and Siri, nothing else.
There was a very good reason behind their actions, and that is that they wanted to offload the embarrassment of the Hilton bombing onto us.
Well, our complaint is that we were convicted of a crime that we didn't commit, and actually a crime that didn't even occur. I believe that the 3 men are innocent and they should be released, and I think that Siri should be charged.
We're all very close to them, we're all behind them to the hilt, and there's no way known we would ever let them down. We'll be there to see them come out and be joyous about it all, I'm quite sure.
Step up, young men, don't lose your faith. There's one thing in your favour.
Part a garbage truck outside